Thank you. Thank you, Senator Neves, and to the committee. You know, it's very important that we speak to you as stakeholders in the process. It is very important that you know we support the moratorium. When you stop to look at the current plan for the school district letter grades, it's unresearched, it's divisive, unfair, and potentially harmful to every public school district and to every taxpayer. Unresearched because letter grades were devised in haste without, or let's say without an in-depth study. And without that, you really will look at harm, the idea of cause and effect. Currently designed systems overlook the most important factor that affects learning, and that would be the poverty that has been mentioned here. Decisiveness, it won't come out, but anyway, it does not matter what school system your school happens to be in, how effective your principal, how dedicated your teachers, whether it's poverty that you take in as a precedent. It doesn't matter if you pull together every successful school that is given a target, and even if you are the top notch, like mentioned here, or let's say Bossier, they do a top notch job. And if their score is 117, and it's very hard to reach 120, they'll never make that A. And even if they improve just a little bit, they will stay probably at a B and never reach the A. There are unintended consequences. It's unfair if you would ever overlook poverty. It is something that is a variance in anything that we do. And as long as we use standardized test scores in the manner in which we're using them to say that we're all failing, no matter how hard we work, all of us know that as long as you use those standardized test scores, we will never be perfect. We will strive and work very hard in classrooms day to day. In our school districts, in our schools, as long as you're telling the world that we're failing, that's all our folks are going to hear, that we're failing. No matter how hard we try, no matter how successful everyone is, you'll still give us an F. The letter grades pit the wealthy against the poor. The letter grades make an unfair comparison. The grades won't evaluate the teaching that goes on. The letter grade will send the wrong message. Negative economic impact. The current letter grading system would mislead the community about their schools and unintentionally devalue even their home prices. Letter grades would have a negative impact on the business, on the community, making it harder to draw new businesses to a community. And we probably could go on and on as we talk about ultimate sales tax revenue and the full idea of a downward spiral. Yes, we want to do the best that we can in our classrooms, and we do it every day, all the time. We do the best with what we have. And I believe our schools work very hard day to day to try to get where you want us to go. But it's going to take time. It took a lot of time to even get to the point where you have schools who are almost perfect in what they do. But let me tell you, perfection is hard to improve upon. Because once you've met that status of being 117 out of 120 in your points, it's kind of hard to even stay there or reach something that you continue to move up. As you say, it's a great idea to motivate, but it's really not the answer. We want to always do the best that we can and gain everything that we can in it. You need the right process. You need to look at a task force that not only includes the stakeholders, but people who understand and can help you get a process to that end. There are people in testing measurements. There are folks who can talk to you about what would be the right process to get to where you want to go. And then I think I will close with simply saying to you that they're going to add new tests. And they're going to change things. The educators in here, we argue about what happens happens when I'm there and I make a B, and what happens when you're there and you make an A, and the children are going to change. Standardized test scores vary from year to year in what happens, depending on the baggage that comes. But we work with everyone that comes, no matter learning styles, whether they're ready to learn. We're doing everything that we can without the resources. We're being stripped of everything that we need to function. And I say to you, we not only need revenue and someone to make a difference about that, we also need you to allow this to come to a halt until you can get the right process in order to do what you want to do. Thank you.
I'm trying to come from this from a little bit different perspective. I agree that we're trying to oversimplify a very complicated process. There's a number of factors that go into compiling that score for a school. If you oversimplify that, then parents are not going to know what that A, B, C, D, or F really is comprised of. And the idea that parents can't understand what the school score is, or that they can't understand a simple system of stars, I think is a disservice to our communities. We are looking at educating children to higher levels. Schools are really a microcosm of the communities that they represent. The parents of these children whom we educate and are educating to a higher level can't understand what we are putting out there already. Whether they choose to pay attention to it or not is a different matter. What does that letter grade mean? We know what it means as educators. We know what the little components are. What we need to do is educate our parents what those components are. Instead of trying to say that all total composite, this is your score. I got a composite for my ACT, but I wanted to know what my reading score was, what my math score was. I wanted to know what all the components were. To me, that was much more important than the composite. I'm afraid that if we oversimplify things for parents, we let them off the hook. They don't have to understand the rest of it. We need to understand that, and this has always been a kind of I guess a pet peeve of mine, educators are held responsible for the education of children, but we're only about a third of the process. The other thirds of the process are the parents and the students themselves. We need to make sure that the parents understand what these scores mean, instead of just giving them another simplified version of what we already have provided for them so that they don't have to understand it. I see this as a one-way street. And really and truly, education needs to be a two-way street, or in this case, even a three-way street. It needs to be communication between the parent, student, and the child. And everybody has to be going in the same direction. Parents who see these grades, and they understand what an A, B, C, D, or F means, are they going to understand what their part in that grade is? Is the student going to understand what their part in that grade is? Or are they going to look at that, and is the community going to look at that and say, well, we must not have very good teachers in our schools? Nothing could be further from the truth. There are too many factors within the school score, and too many factors within the scores for even a child to say that it's one person's fault or it's one person's deficiency. We need to start creating a culture that takes a look at each kid, each school, each district, and says, okay, there are deficiencies here. We need to figure out how to work with the deficiencies. I think the committee, and I guess Bessie, and certainly NCLB, has taken the spare the rod, spoil the child premise really to its height. However, there's always a flip side. The person with the rod sometimes is an abuser. We can't keep beating on our teachers. We can't keep beating on our students. We can't keep beating on our communities, because all we're going to do is beat them into submission, and that submission might be F. I really believe that we need to take a look at some other method for educating to the public what our schools are doing.
I'll make this relatively short, but it's a different paradigm that has been represented here today. I'm going to speak on behalf of LS United. I'm also speaking as an educator who teaches teachers. So I'm in the academic environment sending out my students and teaching them such things about reliability and also validity. Whenever examining any quantitative measurement, any measuring tool that we have in place, we're going to assign an A, B, C, D, or a grade of 100, or any from 100 to 0, you have to consider the expert advice of those who've done research in the area of evaluation, and Senator LaFleur will answer some of your questions. You have to consider the validity of that tool. Okay? You have to determine whether or not you're measuring what you're supposed to measure. You also have to consider the reliability of that tool, and that is whether or not it's consistent across the board. Okay? Not only that, but you have to consider whether or not the validity and reliability, if indeed it's not valid and reliable, whether or not it's contaminated by some other source. Now, some people have suggested that perhaps that this particular tool is contaminated by a political agenda. I don't know that for sure, but it's possible that it is. But if the only thing you're using to measure the efficacy of a school is outcomes assessment, if the only tool you're using right now is to determine the efficacy of the school is the grades that the students get, it's a real mistake, because you're not looking at the evaluations of the teachers that are given by the administrators. You're not looking at the evaluations of the administrators that are given by the teachers. You're not looking at all the other evaluation tools that are sources of evidence that determine the efficacy of that school. And this is an opinion, and I have to say from an empirical point of view, since I've had expertise and experience in this, and it's what I teach my teachers on how to evaluate their students. It's how we're taught to evaluate our administrators in secondary education. It's how we're taught to be evaluated, and it's how we choose to be evaluated. We don't use just one source of evidence. And that's a real mistake, I think, that the initial Bessie Board has come up with. We do need to look at other sources of evidence, and that's from empirical knowledge. It's also from the expertise of those who are in higher education.